Hello? We're getting going now. Everybody take your seats, please. Thank you. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4 to 6 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 150 days of receipt of the application of zoning and 210 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. And we have quite a few motions that mostly Vice Chair Tierney will be moving, but if anyone else has another motion on any of the items listed today, if you can give it to us in advance, that's really good for the benefit of the people that came out to speak, but also for the for your council colleagues. Okay. Any declarations of interest? I just wanted to say that I heard from both Councillor Moffat and Councillor Blade that they are in traffic, and they were hoping to be 10 minutes late, but we'll see about that. And I also wanted to express our real best wishes to our colleague, Councillor Jeff Leeper, who I'm sure that you all heard had suffered a heart attack yesterday and is in the Heart Institute here in Ottawa, which is the best heart institute in the world. I hear his spirits are, as they always are, chipper, and he'll be back with us in good time. Confirmation of minutes from the January 24th meeting, 2019. Have they carried? Okay, the first item we'll be holding, it's the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036. Second item we'll be holding, it's the site plan, it's the site plan control process and fees review. In just a minute, I've got an updated list. I'm just going to have a look at it. Okay, I have two people who are in agreement with it. I have David Renfro and Kelly Rodenizer. Are you both here? Mm-hmm. Okay. If the committee is prepared to carry this, the site plan process and fees review, do you still need to speak?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Kelly?
I do not either.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on? Is it just one question? Because I don't really need to hold it all if it's just for that. So we have a technical amendment as well. So you can ask your question right now.
The question on the site plan control process and fees was around the consultation process. In the very last page around the summary, there's a question around, or there's a statement around staff may not be available for public consultations that are asked for by a councillor. I wanted you to clarify what that means. What circumstances would staff not be available? I'm also curious if there would be in the future any thought of charging councillors for staff to attend those meetings. This is what I'm concerned about. I want to make sure we have clarity on what the intentions are as part of that.
Are you offering that?
I'm certainly not offering that. Absolutely.
Sometimes we do that.
Do we?
Yeah.
Anyhow, if you could clarify that, because certainly, you know, going door to door, I don't think we heard from anyone that they would want less consultation. I want to make sure that what we are supporting today would not limit public consultation as part of this process in any way.
Thank you. Madam Chair, to answer that question, the intent of this program is to be able to actually, we're increasing the transparency around the consultation. So currently right now, some of our standard site plan applications are not on our DevApp site. So with this new program, we're actually going to be adding all of those to the DevApp site with a link for the staff to be able to receive comments from the community. With respect to your question around the public consultation, we are trying to manage a limited staff resource pool, and our applications continue to rise. So you can just sort of picture the graph that we would have. We have a gap. So our focus is really on trying to make sure that we have staff available to deal with those types of applications that may be more complex and are really generating that community concern. So the notion in that comment was really, if it's a standard application, we aren't expecting to do public consultation for all of them. We really want to focus on those that have the community concern with the complex. And at any point in time, the councillor's office does want to run a public consultation. You're absolutely more than encouraged to do so.
Under what circumstances would you? Is it all? Is it some? It's just not clear from the report.
So perhaps we have two choices. You can have this conversation, the rest of it, because I think she's answered it to the best of her ability. We can hold the item till after we do other things. I will tell you that one of the reasons is, and Ms. Snedden told me this, our applications in January are up 91%. We are the only municipality that does what we do with site plans. This is not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It is about doing it better and managing it better and being able to provide services so that people like the FCA, and I see Sheila Perry here in the audience, who are rigorous in their review of all applications across the city, can actually find information on site plans that they're not having access to too. So it's actually probably consulting in a more efficient way, for sure, but being able to manage the ones that are absolutely of critical importance. Did I say good? Yeah.
Well, if I can follow up offline then with Ms. Snedden about circumstances around the discretionary, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good question. To both of you, are you still happy if we carry this on content? Both Mr. Renfro and Ms. Rodenizer? Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks very much. On the technical amendment?
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Therefore, be resolved that recommendation 2 be amended to read as follows. 2, amendments to the fees of the planning application for the planning applications bylaw 2017-18 as outlined in document 2 now be included in the 2019 draft budget.
So that's adding it to the budget. Okay? Carried? Carried. Thank you. On the item as amended? Carried? Carried. Thanks very much. Okay, item number 3, we're holding that. We have speakers. That's the draft operating and capital budget for Planning Committee for 2019. The next item is 2280 City Park Drive. That's a zoning bylaw amendment in Vice Chair Tierney's ward. Does anyone on the committee have any questions? I have one speaker, and it's Paul Black from FOTEN. Paul, are you here? Okay. If we're prepared to carry this item, do you need to speak? Thank you. Is the item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next item is 301 Palladium Drive. That's in Councillor Hubley's ward. I don't have anybody registered at all to speak on this one. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. Does anyone have any questions? No? Is the item carried? It's carried. Thank you. The next one is the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw 2008-250 omnibus amendments Q1 2019. I have does anyone have any questions? I think it was very well described, by the way, in the pages and pages itemized. No, Hugo, you're here? I think I saw you. Hugo Lalone is with Minto. You say that you need to speak if needed. Do you need to? No. Okay, so is this item carried? Thank you. The next item, number 7, is the official plan amendment, the 180 Appeal Settlement, Canada West. We have a motion from Councillor Gower. You know what, it's, when you think about it, I always call you the right name, but when I get here and I look at Scott Moffat's name, I'm thinking like, anyways, Gower. Yeah, but yeah, let's put that on the table because I do have somebody to speak if necessary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can read the motion. A bit of a preamble. Had a lot of interest from residents on this, due to an administrative error in how the report was written. So this is an amendment to correct that before it would rise to council. The motion states that whereas the report title Official Plan Amendment 180 Appeal Settlement Canada West states that Councillor Gower is aware of the report and has provided no comments, and whereas the aforementioned statement was an administrative error, as Councillor Gower was actually not aware of the report before publication as part of the Planning Committee agenda, and whereas Councillor Gower has subsequently been briefed by Policy, Legal, Planning, and Recreation Planning staff on the report, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee approve the report section titled Comments by Ward Councillor be amended prior to rising to Council to reflect Councillor Gower's comments as follows. You ready? All right. I support this recommendation. All recreation amenities originally considered for the district park will be accommodated in the reconfigured space, co-locating with the future high school aligns with current best practices for suburban design, and will eliminate the need for a separate parking lot and situate the district park closer to a future transit hub. Additional recreation space will be available to the community through a local park in informal areas along Feed Mill Creek, and a future stormwater management pond will create additional natural areas.
And you are going to be so proud of this when you see it all built, because we have an example from many, many years ago before amalgamation in the PN when Mother Teresa High School opened. It was Jack Sterling, Jack's over there, who was the Deputy City Manager of Planning and Parks and Public Works, came up with a brilliant idea to share the space differently. So it took less space. Remember, Rick? Less space for Mother Teresa. We have a 32-acre Ken Ross Park now, and it's an amazing complex, benefits everybody. So thank you very much for that catch. So on the amendment, is that carried? And on, oh, so Peter, did you want to speak? Peter Hume is here if you needed to. No? Good. On the item as amended? Carried? Okay, then we have the settlement of Appeal 2 to Official Plan Amendment 180. Do I have any motions on this one? No. I have Greg Winters from Novatech. Anyone else have any questions around the table? Do we need to hold it? Greg, where are you? Oh, hi. Do you need to speak if we're prepared to carry it? Okay. So is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next one is it's a Councillor Kavanagh motion. We had a notice of motion, direction to staff to initiate a rezoning of 975 Woodruff Avenue, and Councillor Leeper was to move it, but Vice Chair Tierney is going to move it. Do you want to hold it, or do you want to? Oh, you don't mind, eh? Oh, yeah. So Councillor Shirelli's going to move it. Pretty much guarantees you a win with that many votes. Okay. So Councillor Shirelli, he'll pass it over to you.
Wrong motion. And he's just going through the motions here.
Yeah, I mean, how about right here? Is it not up? I think it's up.
The left side. It's Valentine's Day.
Okay. Yeah, technically, okay. You got it? Okay. Which one? Okay, so we have, so it's item number 9, the Planning Committee directs staff to initiate rezoning for 975 Woodruff Avenue to remove rooming house as a permitted use on the site.
Yep. Good catch, Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah.
It was really good just for being proactive. Anyone,
we went through the R4 zoning review, and part of that was to eliminate this kind of thing popping up. And this did pop up partway through the process. And I think committee wanted to fix that.
Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, just to answer Councillor Shirelli's comment, this application preceded Council's adoption of the new R4 bylaw. That's why it got through. If it had come in a little later, it would have been captured by the bylaw and would not be permitted today.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on trying to prevent this.
Yeah.
Councillor Kavanagh, good? So is item carried? Thank you.
Thanks.
Item number 10, appointments to urban and suburban panels of the Committee of Adjustment. We're going to defer that one till the next meeting, and Vice Chair Tierney is going to
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Be it resolved that this report be deferred to the next Planning Committee meeting of February 28th, 2019.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that? It would have been moved by Councillor Moffat, who was instrumental on the sponsorship panel, but their 10 minutes has morphed into 20 now. Ottawa traffic. Yeah. Okay, so Murray, you don't need to speak to deferral? Okay. Thank you very much. So on the item, is it deferred? Carried? Carried. Okay, we have next number 11, appointments to the Built Heritage Subcommittee. I have no speakers. Is that carried? Councillor Gallagher? Number 12, we have the Built Heritage Subcommittee terms of reference. No speakers on that. A lot of work has gone into that, though, over the last couple of years, certainly. And a lot of public consultation with the members of the heritage community and under the leadership of Court Curry. Are you here, Court, still? Yeah. And a job well done, I think. And now you've inherited this, and are you comfortable with it? Okay, so on this item, is it carried? Thank you. And on the Planning Committee terms of reference, I have no speakers again. Changes are mostly related, if not fully related, to the changes at Built Heritage and how less of the items will need to come through Planning Committee as well. So no questions on that? Carried? Thank you. Yep. And so we have a motion to add an additional item. Vice Chair Tierney.
Great. So first of all, on the suspension, therefore be resolved that the following motion be added to the Planning Committee agenda of February 14th, 2019, pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the Rules of Procedure.
Carried. And now I'm going to ask, once you read that, I'm going to ask Mr. Rose just to make a comment on it.
Everyone get
this
cozy.
Is on the modification to OPA 180. Correct. You want it?
Therefore, it be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that Council endorse the rewording of the modification 2 of the official plan amendment 180 as follows.
So, sure, sorry.
2, the city consider the removal of the land from the agricultural resource area designation to allow the urban expansion of the demonstrated through the comprehensive review undertaken of the city and addressing the matters required by the provincial policy statement that the land is required for the expansion of the existing settlement area or identified of a new settlement area. 3, that the removal of the land from the agricultural resource area designation be considered outside the comprehensive review where it is demonstrated that the land does not meet the requirements of the agricultural resource area through A, a municipal-wide assessment, the Lear study, B, an area-specific assessment where the area assessment is the 250 hectare and the area boundaries are agreed to by the city and demonstrates 1, based upon the new information related to 1 or more Lear factors and the land's not part of the prime agricultural area. 2, any redesignation would avoid the potential of adverse impacts on the adjacent agricultural lands of operation, or if unavoidable, such adverse impacts are mitigated to the extent feasible. The outcome of the area-specific assessment would be general rural area designation that is at least 250 hectares in size, or the smaller area would be logical extension or the existing general rules of designation. If the different rural designation being proposed then needed for the designation within the time frame of the official plan must also be established. Be it further resolved that legal services be directed to advance at the LPAT at the position of the city flowing from the city's disposition of this matter.
Okay, so I'm not to Mr. Willis, to Mr. Mark. Tell us why we need to do this today.
Why this needs to be done today, Madam Chair, is that there is a hearing that is scheduled to commence on March the 4th dealing with the agricultural issues in the official plan. The only remaining issue is in fact this modification. In a nutshell, Council adopted a plan that would have allowed a redesignation from agricultural resource lands at any time. The Minister modified the plan to say, no, you can only do it at a comprehensive review. The city and others appealed the Minister's modification. A settlement that has been reached, that has been agreed by all staff, the Minister, and all the other appellants, that would say the plan could be, an amendment could be sought to redesignate lands from agricultural resource area at any time, but it would be subject to the criteria that Vice Chair Tierney read out, set forth in Policy 3. So as I said, this is going to a hearing on March the 4th. We need Council's endorsement of a settlement to have a position. Everyone else is in agreement with this policy, Madam Chair.
Okay. Is that carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go back to the beginning of the future of the City of Ottawa, and I'll ask Mr. Willis to come forward. Talk about Ottawa Next beyond 2036, and with him is Mr. John Smith. Do we need the lights down?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
This is a very big day.
It is a big day. I'm joined here just at the table by John Smith, our Director of Long Range Planning and Economic Development, and two of the staff who've worked very, very hard on the Beyond 2036 report and the work plan for the official plan. So Carol Reddy and George Clayton are here with me as well. I also want to acknowledge that one of our consultants who assisted us in the process, Mr. Joe Barrage, who spoke with some councillors earlier this morning, is also in the audience as well to assist us on this. It is a big day. Councillors, today we are asking for your approval of the work plan for the new City of Ottawa official plan. The official plan we have today is for the most part a product of our amalgamation. Now, almost 20 years later, it is time to do a major refresh. This is an ambitious project. We don't intend to tinker at the margins, but we will propose a new plan that replaces our current plan, a plan that looks forward and will help the city meet future challenges and seize the opportunities to come. The pace of change is accelerating in the world. That's not just an Ottawa phenomenon, that's all around the world, and it will continue to accelerate from an economic, environmental, social, and technological.
Can you talk up a little bit, please? Just bring it forward, because there's too much people talking and I can't really. I don't think everybody can hear well. Thank you.
Our goal is to have a new official plan that is both adaptable and resilient to help us navigate the changes that will come, not only over the next 25 years, but in the decades that follow. For those of you who've heard me speak before, you know I always like talking a little about the history of planning in Ottawa. It's a bit of a thing for me. So if you look back at our population and understand the history of Ottawa, we just see where we've come in globally what a very short period of time. Il suffit de regarder à quoi ressemblait la ville auparavant pour constater à quel point elle a changé. If you go right back to our incorporation in 1855, we were a small lumber town. We had 60 stores, we had 3 banks, 3 insurance offices, 3 newspapers. Back at the time we were lucky we had more than. 1 telegraph office and 7 schools and a canal connecting it to Lake Ontario. The decision to make us the national capital was the big game changer that fundamentally changed our trajectory as a city. It's very fair to say that if Ottawa was not the national capital, we would not be the city we are today, nor would we have the opportunities that we have in the future. The first major urban plan that covered beyond just the downtown, there were earlier plans, but they focused just on the downtown. So if you think about a bigger trajectory of it, was the Grey Bear Plan of 1950, which was a federal plan. That was not a municipal plan. And that plan was over 70 years ago now. There were earlier plans, but very limited. The legacy of the Grey Bear Plan for us, which we see today in many ways, was growth in areas south and east of the Rideau River. Councillor Cloutier's ward, for example, didn't even exist. Much of Councillor Brockington's ward didn't exist at that time, and the Grey Bear Plan contemplated the growth in that area. And College Ward and Councillor Chiarelli's, for example, were all kind of byproducts of this plan. The Greenbelt was a creation of this plan, and the Riverfront Parkway system and freight rail modern rationalization in the region were a creation of this plan. But this plan was vastly car-oriented. As a matter of fact, it contemplated the removal of public transportation by rail in the city, and it was this plan also vastly underestimated Ottawa's growth. It did have a projection for about now, and we're about 3 times larger a city than it had projected we would be at this stage in time. Next slide. Sorry, we're missing one girl. Must have been a click. Excuse us. We're having a technological issue. So this is the regional municipality of Ottawa-Carleton official plan from 1974. This is 45 years ago. And in its day, this was a state-of-the-art official plan in North America. It was the first of its kind in North America that contemplated the idea of a city center connected to satellite suburban communities in the west, south, and east by high-order rapid transit, which in those days was the bus rapid transit system, the BRT, which is the transitway that was ultimately built. And, you know, it's interesting. If you think back, if I was sitting here in 1970 and I said to council, we're going to build a series of bus highways connecting a bunch of new communities out to the outer edges of a new cities being created on the east, west, and south, I think you would have given me a funny look. But it was a visionary plan, and in its day, it was copied. And as a matter of fact, our bus rapid transit system today, my colleague, Mr. Manconi, tells me we still get visitors from around the world who come to see our BRT system as being one of the most effective in the entire world. And the other legacy it left us, which is real for you today, is that BRT system was built with the idea of converting it one day to rail. So the grades were set so it could ultimately be built to rail. We don't have level crossings, we have grade separations. So today, when you make the decision on stage 2 LRT, it is cheaper to build because of the decisions made in 1974. So it is an incredible legacy for us. So let's talk about today. As the mayor has said in his State of the City address, we calculate that before Canada Day sometime, we will pass the 1 million population mark, which is a big milestone for any city. Ottawa forms part of a bigger region, which Statistics Canada calls the Ottawa-Gatineau metropolitan area, and together, we with Gatineau and some of the smaller municipalities are a population of 1.5 million people today. We are one of Canada's 6 largest metropolitan regions, and we have grown physically in all that time. We've grown further in Canada and Stittsville, Orleans, Barrhaven, beyond the Greenbelt. We have intensified in the core in many ways. We have actually a very stable downtown population, which not every North American city has. And this is consistent with what that regional official plan intended. Mais Ottawa n'a pas seulement pris de l'expansion, elle s'est fondamentalement transformée au fil du temps. Je vous donne quelques exemples. We've moved from our initial resource-based roots, moving primarily to a government town, but now we're a much more complex knowledge-based diversified economy. Almost half of us in Ottawa who are employed work in the public administration field, healthcare and education sectors, including 145,000 residents working for the Government of Canada last time we checked. But we are diversifying in our economy, and there are many, many more businesses in the city than there used to be, and we have growth in many new sectors. We're also diverse in terms of our origins for many of us. So in 1941, 98% of Ottawa residents were of European background. Today, over 1 in 5 residents were born outside of Canada, the vast majority coming from Asia, the Americas, and Africa. There are also close to 40,000 residents in the city today who identify themselves as Indigenous. We're also a much more vibrant cultural city. Used to be the city that fun forgot, as they said, but things have changed dramatically, and we've seen some major movement in that area in the last number of years, investments in cultural events and cultural institutions, and this growth and diversity has led to a much more vibrant city life. So we're getting a reputation for arts, culture, and festivals beyond just the national institutions. We are an urban city, without a doubt. We've grown from a small town capital to be the significant center of a metropolitan region, and as we discussed earlier today, we're part of a complex of urban regions that includes Montreal and Toronto as well. And then we, collectively, the 3 of us, are facing competition from other parts of North America and around the world. So when you think about an official plan, the main question is, what is our future going to be? It's fair to say that the changes to Ottawa the past century have been dramatic, and of course we're continuing to change. In fact, the pace of social and technological change has increased so rapidly in the last 50 years that the plans we have done have had trouble keeping up, as a matter of fact, with the rate of change. So what will be the drivers for the next century for us? And this is some of the work we looked at in our key project called Beyond 2036. En décembre 2016, le Conseil a demandé au personnel d'entreprendre une étude de planification sur la croissance future de la ville afin de préparer le terrain pour le prochain examen du plan officiel. So over the past year, we have been engaging in a very broad cross-section of city stakeholders to discuss these very questions. What are those big drivers that will affect us in the future that we have to use to frame our next official plan? In the resulting planning study we're presenting today, we looked at what forces will drive change over the coming decades, and we have developed some plausible scenarios based on the change drivers. Now, I want to emphasize, the intention was not to portray scenarios and pick one to hit. The idea was to put a broad range of scenarios of what might happen out there so that we could plan accordingly to be adaptable should any of those scenarios hit. Certainly, some of those scenarios have positive attributes and some have negative attributes if we don't take action, but the idea of choosing scenarios is understanding what's the range of things that could possibly face us. I'm going to take you through some of the things we found. So economic growth in contemporary cities will be dominated by the knowledge sector. Mr. Berge talked about this morning earlier. Almost 80% of our workforce is already employed in this area if you broadly interpret what a knowledge-based workforce actually includes. In addition, the digital revolution is transforming all sectors of the economy and as more digital processes replace human functions. Well-trained labor will be in an increasing demand both locally and internationally, and we can't take for granted how easy it is going to be to get that. And Councillor Suds isn't here, but she would tell you in her ward in the Canada North Business Park, they are struggling to find talent because they are facing ferocious competition from around the world. So how do we prepare for these transformations? How can Ottawa get a larger share of the immigrants that come to Canada? How do we make sure that the infrastructure exists to encourage innovation? Our competition is no longer just Toronto, Montreal, or even Calgary. We are competing to maintain our existing workforce and retain our kids in the city when they're educated and they're ready to work. One of the strongest urban economic forces restructuring the world is a system of cities as of spikiness. Mr. Berge talked about this today, where fewer cities are having a bigger dominance in the world economy. And this trend towards concentration of higher order economic activity in fewer cities is playing out even in North America. We're seeing it. So then, if you look at New York City's economy, it's bigger than Spain's and it's bigger than Canada's. So as we see this force coming together, now it's not all bad. I mean, we have the opportunity to collaborate with our biggest neighbors, and so that we collectively together are that same level of competition with the world. And because Toronto and Montreal both have advantages of their own, we do feel optimistic that should we work together on this, will solidify our own advantages. And this will be a mega region that will be a global competitor. So the questions we're asking in the official plan process that proceed is, how do we improve linkages between this city, its airports, to the other cities of the world, and work collaboratively on these interglobal transportation systems with Toronto and Montreal? How can we give the Ottawa's own McDonald-Cartier International Airport the flexibility it needs to grow and diversify? Can we give Ottawa a competitive advantage through its digital infrastructure? So these are the big systems of change that have huge economic implications. Climate change is absolutely something we have to plan to adapt to and try to mitigate in every way we possibly can. We contain thousands of hectares of forests, wetlands, and other natural lands close to the built-up areas of the city. It's very much what makes the city a very beautiful place to live. And these features are central to our own identity. I mean, you can't imagine those pictures of Ottawa with the loss of some of those important natural attributes in our city. And that's true in every ward of the city. It's very true. With population growth, outwards and becoming dense, it's going to be a challenge to find areas for urban green spaces and protect natural systems close to the urban boundary. Climate change will have a significant effect on Ottawa's natural environment. Provincial estimates say that Eastern Ontario will see increases in summer temperatures between 2 to 3 degrees by 2041 to 2070, and will also have increased storm events, including flooding, ice, and windstorms. Selon les résultats de cette étude, on peut s'attendre à une pression accrue sur l'environnement naturel, les infrastructures, la gestion des situations d'urgence et la santé publique. Que pouvons-nous faire pour protéger et élargir nos espaces naturels dans le contexte des pressions associées au changement climatique et à l'aménagement? Comment pouvons-nous faire en sorte que l'investissement en infrastructure dottera emprunte la voie de développement durable compte tenu de ces pressions? Immigration is essential to increasing population and supporting the growth of our labor force. However, many immigrants who move to Ottawa don't stay. They leave because of fewer opportunities and the competition from bigger cities. So job opportunities and skills accreditation, and I appreciate that as not an area of municipal jurisdiction, but that actually will have a big impact on our ability to retain people who come to Canada to work. And so it's important that we show that we care in these matters with the governments who do control those issues. Also as important is people come to live in communities. They don't come just to live in the big Ottawa, they come to live in communities within Ottawa. So communities are the backbone of a welcoming environment for people, and whether they be our own children who we wish to stay in the city or people coming to Ottawa either on rotation because of a federal job or coming to stay permanently through immigration. And what that complete community involves is proximity to affordable transportation, to work, to school, shopping, places of worship, childcare clinics, recreation. It includes affordable housing and includes special services to support newcomers to Canada. So we're asking in this process, how can we create the conditions to attract and retain immigrants, and how do we better help people integrate into communities in our city? One of the things our study Beyond 2036 showed is that there are pressures on community cohesion all across North America. And a livable city is one where communities are socially, economically, and culturally connected. Community cohesion creates a sense of shared belonging for residents of all backgrounds and supports diversity. There have to be equal opportunities to everyone for access to services, employment, and education. Population growth in well-defined neighborhoods creates economies of scale that allow new amenities to come. This is what we're seeing in some of our areas where we've had intensification. We're actually getting new, really high-quality amenities in these areas. It also allows cultural offerings. It allows livelier public spaces and urban diversity. However, growth does bring some disparities in some areas, and it doesn't always mean just differences in wealth. It could also mean different accesses to transit, different accesses to housing that's affordable, employment, and parks and public spaces, and health and public services. So the questions we're asking in this process is, how can we move Ottawa's existing communities to being more complete, and how can we encourage neighborhoods to thrive in a bigger city? Ottawa's future prosperity is linked to efficient movement of people and goods. If well managed, a strong and integrated mobility network will allow Ottawa to compete with cities nationally and globally. For a growing number of people, this is a shift away from what they used to do, which is taking their own car, to going to actually a suite of services, not just one thing. So that they may use their car for certain activities that you need to do in your daily life. Cycling, walking, light rail transit, car sharing, ride sharing, those other things. People will use a combination of services in bigger cities. And if you travel and you go to bigger cities, you see this playing out on the ground already today. We also have a real issue that same-day delivery has changed our life. I never cease to be amazed that I order something with a click and a day later it's on my doorstep, but that has actual implications in the way our city actually works. So online shopping is creating a growth in public expectations on goods movement. People expect those goods to be able to move within our cities rapidly. So what we're seeing in other parts of the world is changing delivery modes. We're seeing new land uses called click and collect places, where if you order it, it doesn't necessarily come to your house, but it goes to a depot very close to where you live. And that may, and it plays with neighborhood storefronts, and it'll change the way our main streets will behave over time. We want to ensure we still have vibrant main streets, and we have to find a way to make both of these things happen at the same time. So can we use these technological advances in communications to support a more livable city? How can the city remain nimble to a whole bunch of trends we can't predict today? Because we can't predict. We don't have the crystal ball for how this is entirely going to play out. But can we make our policies adaptive so as the changes come and we're not caught flat-footed? So the shape of the city is going to change, and there will be a reciprocal relationship between a city and mobility. These things have to work together. Much of our shape of our city today has been driven by convenience and moving around, and that will become more and more significant as the city gets larger. As a result, the city is going to continue to expand. We will see new communities built. We will see new neighborhoods built. And the strength of our city will be that those things feel like complete neighborhoods in many other areas of the city. But we have to change our mentality. We are a metropolitan region now. We're not just a city. You know, work has changed. The need of businesses and industry are changing. The way we move in the city is changing. Housing. If you read the papers and see what Toronto is facing and other cities are facing, affordability cannot be taken for granted. We actually have to do work to ensure that we maintain that affordability within our city. And as we get more and more diverse, we have to make sure that the offerings support that diversity. So can we become more compact and still affordable and livable? That's a challenge for the official plan. It's one of those big questions we have to get our hand around. How can we make our suburban communities more complete while still maintaining a thriving core? How can we sustain rural villages and hamlets and give residents out in those rural areas viable opportunities to stay living in the rural area as they age out of their single homes? Right now, the policy environment in both Ottawa and provincially is not very supportive to building multifamily housing for people who need to live in assisted living in rural communities, and that has to change, because we will lose rural communities if they can't be sustained by some smart choices about making sure hamlets and villages can survive. Ottawa is very proud of its brand as a capital city, and we are very fortunate to have that opportunity. But we have to still define ourselves as a global mid-sized city. As we become more diverse through immigration, there's an opportunity to support the diversity by advancing cultural offerings through festivals, the arts, food, crafts, artisan innovations, and emerging technologies. Ottawa est par ailleurs une ville rurale, un aspect qui jusqu'à présent n'a pas été mis de l'avant dans l'identité de la ville. En effet, les terres rurales occupent 90% de son territoire. So that vision of a city does have to include both an urban and a rural component. And there aren't other comparators in Canada of cities that have this mix that we have. So we have to do it our way to ensure that we do cover both at the same time. A vibrant public realm is going to be very important to this. This slide says it all about what happens when the offerings are there. People really want to be part of it, and we need to promote our built heritage, neighborhood identity, and street life. We need to have a renewed focus on the Ottawa River and the offering, what the enormous potential that it has, and all aspects of our identity as a city that involve being a capital and a mid-sized city at the same time. So we have to work with our partners, the National Capital Commission, Parks Canada, the federal government, on looking at the Ottawa River, the Rideau River, the canal as opportunities, and how do we promote Ottawa together as a mature urban capital. And I should say the Ville de Gatineau is also a key partner in that discussion. So our report, Ottawa Beyond 2036, provided the overall structure for the review. It identified the key questions we need to carry forward into that next phase. We've identified those forces that potentially will shape us, and we now have to take this and turn it into policy directions. And now I'm going to turn to what the official plan process is going to look like. So once Council approves the official plan, ultimately it will be implemented through zoning, city programs and funding, as well as joint action with our partners and stakeholders. So what is an official plan? I think it's probably important to just base ourselves for a moment on that. The official plan under provincial legislation provides the policy framework to guide our physical development, and it talks about regulating land use, managing growth and change in urban, suburban, and rural areas, planning for public works and infrastructure, planning for new communities and existing areas undergoing change, and preserving natural systems while providing for the wise use of resources. A lot of this comes right from provincial legislation. So a forward-looking official plan, we want to go from that 2003 plan to a brand new plan. Comme j'ai mentionné en introduction, notre plan officiel actuel a presque 20 ans. Il a été créé dans le but de regrouper 11 municipalités en une seule ville. Nous avons fait du bon travail dans le cadre de ce plan, mais il est temps pour nous d'adopter une nouvelle stratégie de planification pour la ville d'Ottawa. Une stratégie qui permette d'assurer la compétitivité et la prospérité des entreprises basées à Ottawa. Une stratégie qui permettra à Ottawa de se démarquer des villes de taille moyenne du reste du monde pour attirer les cerveaux les plus brillants et les plus talentueux. Une stratégie qui contribue à faire de notre ville un lieu dynamique où il fait bon vivre. Une stratégie qui tient compte du fait que nous vivons dans un monde où tout évolue rapidement et que nous devrons être résilients face aux changements et aux bouleversements à venir. So we have a four-phase process for our official plan, and we're asking for you to approve, you and council to approve this process today. The first phase is our background studies, which is a series of discussion papers, and I'll talk about that in a coming slide, and also approval of population and employment projections, which drive any official plan. The second phase will be where we prepare the policy directions for council's endorsement, and when council endorses those policy directions, we will then turn that actual into draft policy for the official plan, and that's when we will table the draft official plan document in phase 3 at Planning Committee and Council, and these will all have significant stakeholder input, and I'll talk about that on another slide. And then ultimately, council will adopt it, and then it must go to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, who will approve it. So as part of the engagement process, we want to use a combination of websites, social media, and community stakeholder engagement events. We know there are people who are comfortable with coming to open houses and meetings, but increasingly many of our younger residents, or maybe some people who aren't comfortable talking at a public meeting, are more comfortable providing comments online. And several of our consultations we've done in the last year are showing an increasing demand for online consultations. So we have a dedicated website that is live, or will be momentarily, and it will provide all of this background information. Am I right, Carol?
Yes.
Carol says I'm right. It's live. So the information will be there. People can get a chance to get it. They'll have lots of opportunity to provide it, and we will be scheduling a series of consultations over the next little while. Des consultations sont menées tout au long du processus de révision du plan officiel, incluant des consultations sur les documents de travail, des consultations sur les orientations stratégiques, des consultations sur la version plénière du plan officiel. So our two waves of discussion papers, the first phase are those papers we feel that could have significant changes in potential directions of the city. The second wave is more improving the policies that we already have that we know need modernization, but the policy framework we've got is a good starting point, but it's about bringing it up to date. So we've broken them into two bits. So wave one will address things like, what is the greater metropolitan region? What is that concept? Where do we go from here? We're going to talk about the economy, working in close partnership with Ottawa Public Health, and Dr. Etches is here today. She's been working with me and the team very closely on the process. We're going to talk about the healthy Ottawa as a cornerstone of this new plan. It's really important that that's something we add a major new consideration on. We're going to look at energy, climate, housing, infrastructure and water management, natural Ottawa and rural Ottawa. And infrastructure more broadly includes mobility and other elements. And then the second phase is, when we get into the nitty-gritty of the land use designations, we get into the specific growth projections, we get council's concurrence to a growth management strategy, we finalize the mobility strategy based on the growth management strategy, look at a housing policy update based on that, urban design and heritage, employment lens, and how we're going to manage them in the future, make them adaptable, and the cultural aspect. So in the first phase of the official plan review, we want to get Ottawa residents interested and participating in the review. We want to reach out to groups that are traditionally underrepresented in municipal planning processes. To this end, we are going to be having an open house on March 4th to present the major themes of the official plan to the public. There'll be an afternoon session and an evening session. We're going to have follow-up meetings with target stakeholder groups, including Indigenous groups, New Canadians, small businesses, seniors, and youth. We're providing all of you councillors with engagement packages so that you could do your own consultations in your own communities, and we'll work with you if you need some staff help to come and talk about this. We'd be glad to help on that. And so, because we think you're an important partner in reaching out to people as well in your own communities. And we'll be organizing a series of discussion panels on some specific themes. So our goal, what we're trying to achieve, is that Ottawa is the most livable mid-sized city in North America, and We need to keep focused on this core objective as we deliver this work plan. And thank you, Madam Chair. I know this was a longer presentation, but this is a really important milestone project for us, and we're happy to answer any questions.
It was well worth the time. Thank you very much. Okay, normally we would go to the delegations first before we ask questions of staff. Everyone okay with that? Okay. But thank you very much to all of you, so stay tuned. We have speakers. The first speaker up is Erwin Dreesen. Erwin sent his comments in as well yesterday. Meanwhile, while Mr. Dreesen's getting set up, anybody who wants to ask questions after the speaker, so Councillor Judas, Councillor Kavanagh, I saw. Kavanagh, Elshantiri. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And
I'm just going to say this because you're the first speaker. You're the first speaker up today, so I'm just going to say this. It's 5 minutes you have to speak.
Yes. Back in January 2018, with the participation of senior city staff, about 100 people gathered on a Saturday morning to discuss planning issues under the theme of Ottawa, a city of neighborhoods. Many of us were led to believe that the city had bought into the idea of building up the new official plan from the ground up, beginning with asking what people want for their neighborhoods. The recent life-sized city series on TVO with Michael Colville-Anderson demonstrated over and over what difference it makes to one's quality of life when neighborhoods are empowered and listened to. The work plan before you signals instead that what we can expect is same old, same old. 2 waves of discussion papers, and a possibly long list of stakeholders, a sponsors group of the chairs and vice chairs of the Planning and Rural Affairs Committees who are to, quote, champion and support, end quote, the project. Worse, what neighborhood grounding there is in the current OP appears in danger of disappearing. I quote from page 17 of the staff report, quote, staff anticipate that the new plan will consolidate the existing 4 volumes that make up the plan today. These include secondary plans and site-specific policies, which will be reviewed to remove duplication or conflicting policies and directions. End quote. I have carefully read the Beyond 2036 report, and I regret to say I found it largely an exercise in futility, with a bias. Futility in that the scenarios are just some of many conceivable. The discussion of drivers rarely rises above generalities, and the planning implications mostly border on stating the obvious. With a bias, because apart from one scenario that would see Ottawa essentially remain a government town, implications of which are ignored in the rest of the report, the authors are convinced that we'll be a metropolis of 2 to 3 million by the end of the century, will all be fully digitized knowledge workers and be able to zip seamlessly to both Montreal and Toronto on high-speed trains. Still, to its credit, staff draws some good lessons from the exercise. Housing choices are inadequate, future modes of mobility are uncertain, urban communities that have been densified are not seeing the benefits. We must strengthen neighborhoods as we renew its infrastructure and raise its level of transit service. I have no idea what that means. Ottawa can leverage its attributes better, and urban, suburban, and rural communities all have something to complain about. Unfortunately, in that list in the staff report, I don't see any urgency to deal with climate change, which is a very concerning omission, and I'm glad to hear some contrary remarks from Mr. Willis. Councillors, if I had my way, I would throw this work plan out. Instead, I would direct staff to, over the next 2 years, do 2 things. Review and update all secondary plans, turn all community design plans into SPs, fill in the gaps where there is neither an SP nor a CDP, and 2, at the same time, develop a consensus document expressing what we can all agree on, a vision, principles, objectives, and constraints. Maybe I missed it, but I was told that there would be a motion to substitute the January 2019 version for the older version that was first published. I don't know whether that motion was passed or not. I hate to tell you, this supposedly corrected version could use more copy editing, but if you want me to point out where, you'll have to pay me. Not a copy editing matter is the claim in Annex 1 that the grand total of 302 responses to a survey that was available for 2.5 months mean a 76% quote overall response rate. Worse is that any rate is given at all to all of 10 responses from young people in another survey. And that the staff report summarizes these feedback results without blushing instills little confidence in the consultation process that we are to see over the next 3 years. Chair Harder, in her op-ed in the Ottawa Business Journal, promised that the city, quote, will ensure that future development is adapted to the needs of residents and businesses within each community, end quote. Why then not start by finding out what residents and businesses want? This work plan does not do that. I conclude by invoking some of the final words of the late Paul Dewar, quote, "It is hard to know how to make a difference. The secret is not to focus on how to solve the problem, but to concentrate on what you can contribute to your country, your community, and neighbors."
Thank you.
Quote. This is my contribution.
Thank you.
I thank you for your attention and I wish you Godspeed.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. I'm going to have the all those motions read out. All the motions will be read out now, so you'll see them, okay? Or you'll at least hear them. Are we putting them up on the board as well? We will as they're introduced, so just watch the boards. Vice Chair Tierney will move all of those.
Great, I'll just dispense with the whereases. Therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development to request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to use his powers under Section 4.5 of the Provincial Policy Statement to pre-authorize the City to complete the official plan on the basis of the 25-year planning horizon, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the Mayor on behalf of City Council to write to local members of the Provincial Legislature to solicit support for the Council's request for a longer planning horizon, and be further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council direct the Planning Committee Chair to proactively seek meetings with Ottawa's political minister and the Minister of Municipal Affairs to advance Council's request to extend the planning horizon, and that the request by City Council 25 years ago, and that the Chair verbally report to the Committee as steps were taken to achieve a longer planning horizon. Madam Chair, we also have another one, and this is just some technical. Therefore, it be resolved that document 1 be replaced with the revised version and distributed to the committee coordinator. I think that addresses something that Mr. Dressen brought up. Yet another motion. Therefore, it be resolved that the study title Ottawa Next Beyond 2034 be tabled and amended as such that the results of 2036, apologies, be tabled and amended as such, the results of Milestone 1 and Milestone 2 be incorporated into the document so that the 3 elements, Ottawa Next, Beyond 2036, Milestone 1, and Milestone 2, together create one comprehensive document to be presented to the Committee and Council as the schedule November 2019. Only a couple more, Madam Chair. This one's the correct one too. So therefore be resolved that the tasks of Milestone 4 as a report be realigned so the analysis of the urban land requirements to be met by the projected 2046 employment needs and criteria by which the land was selected, compromise of the core task 4, and be further resolved that the report which recommends the new land selection criteria evaluate and provide provide on the following: locations of the financial sustainability over the long term for both capital and operating perspectives, locations that the results complete communities, that the support of the city's investment in light rail transit, evaluate the locations within the existing build-up areas and the likelihood of achieving the required densities, the age and conditions of the required infrastructure and transit service level mappings, which produce capital budget projections to support the housing and employment needs, will be implemented through the life of the plan. Be it further resolved that the task four be presented to Planning Committee and Council for approval as recommended in June 2020, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council allow General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure and Economic Development the authority to break the adoption period of the new official plan into 2 stages, so that there's a growth management matters are adopted by Council in Q 2021, and the policy modernization of the remainder of the plan be adopted at the following dates in the next term of Council. Be it further resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council direct General Manager of Planning and Information Economic Development to provide a revised schedule for the official plan to Planning Committee by the end of Q 2019. Yet another motion, Madam Chair. The final one, therefore, be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management of Councilor Sponsor Group for the official plan review. And that is the motions in front of you, Madam Chair.
Well, that's a heck of a lot. So just let me ask you, would it be easier for you if you had them all printed for you, since you're maybe just, well, I know they're on the screen, but they're on the screen at the same time, so people would have to, I'm just asking. Let us know if you want a printed copy. How many printed copies do we want? One? Okay, thank you. All right, back to our delegations. Next one up is Paul Johannes from the Green Space Alliance of Canada's Capital. Paul, followed by Sheila Perry. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for calling me. So I speak today as a resident, a member of the Beyond 2036 Sounding Board, and as chair of the Green Space Alliance of Canada's Capital. So first I'd wish to thank the City of Ottawa for inviting me to be part of the Sounding Board. It was an enriching experience, an exercise. It provided the opportunity to meet a lot of outstanding men and women from across every sector of civil society in Ottawa. So worthwhile exercise. We didn't always quite understand where the scenario building and driver and disruptor identifying was leading us, but upon reading the report, I can at minimum recognize many scenarios that I would definitely not want to see happen. So that alone provides guidance. I note with satisfaction in the executive summary that it stated that the report 2036 will inform the development of the new, including the Green Space Master Plan, which hasn't been updated since 2003, so that was a welcome piece of information. And I'm also struck by the recognition in the introduction to the report on page 7, and I'll quote from it: the 4 themes, mobility and urban form, economic development, environment, and quality of life, are not meant to be separate and stand alone, but rather should be read as interrelated with one another. Notably, the environment is at the base of our ability to develop our society, economy, and quality of life. I like the idea that this is like an underpinning piece that everything else is built on. So that's a point I'll return to later on. Section 6.3 of the report on the environment theme is exhaustive, it's well structured. The planning considerations that are developed from that section alone could provide a comprehensive framework for the city's environmental plans and policies. So kudos from our point of view. In the staff report, we find that there's references to an air quality and climate change master plan, a parks plan. Elsewhere, it's a green space / parks master plan. It's difficult to really ascertain from the report what's the overall structure really that's coming forward for this new official plan. So maybe some clear articulation of these plan elements in the report could be worked on, could be improved on before this is being addressed by council, just to get a better picture of what it is that the beast looks like, even if it's broad outlines. However, in the spirit of drivers and disruption, one major omission in all this material, even though most of the work was performed just a year ago, everything really has changed since then. We are now, without a doubt, facing a climate emergency. Not sometime in the future, not way out in scenario timeframes, but right now. And decisive and effective action has to be taken in the next 10 years, which is the period covered by this plan. So really, effectively, this new official plan must be the city's climate emergency plan. As noted in the introduction, the environment theme underpins the success of all the other domains. So this has implications for the work plan that's outlined on pages 17 and 18 of the staff report. To truly put a climate lens on the official plan, on the next official plan, Wave 1 should be limited to setting out what imperatively must be achieved in the next 10 years in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and increasing our carbon sinks. Having established that through that phase, and Wave 2 can be built around how to achieve these goals through the actions in mobility built form, economic development, environment, quality of life domains. But really, there needs to be that overarching theme, I believe, to this new official plan. This is the city's first official plan in the era of the climate emergency. So it must reflect this imperative above all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Johannes? Well, thank you very much, sir. Did you have any comments at all on that, Mr.
Madam Chair, just be really brief. Mr. Johannes provided some really helpful contribution to the process, as his group did, and certainly he raises the issue of a climate lens. I had a really useful meeting with Ecology Ottawa, who showed me the climate lens the federal government is using now for their work. We think we can adapt that to use in our own process, and we're actually looking at the feasibility of doing that right now, because we agree there needs to be a climate lens overlay on this, and it's a very practical approach I think we can just adapt. So those discussions are still going.
There you go, Mr. Johannes. President of the FCA, followed by David McNichol. Welcome, Sheila. Thanks for all the work you do, all times of the day, all crazy hours.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. As you mentioned, I'm president of the Federation of Citizens Association and also chair of our Planning and Zoning Committee, which has over 60 members across the city. Our community associations number 50 and over. We're all volunteers, and part of this is very important, obviously, for looking ahead at the future of Ottawa. So as a participant in the sounding board, we're really pleased to be part of this. I've circulated a letter, hopefully everyone has, and I just want to touch on some of the highlights. The Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report proposes making Ottawa the most livable mid-sized city in North America. I suggest a neighborhood dimension to that. Make Ottawa the most livable mid-sized city of strong neighborhoods and complete communities in North America. Strong neighborhoods are the foundation to a strong, resilient, and adaptable city. The very goals Ottawa Next has rightly identified as essential to dealing well with whatever an unpredictable future may be in store for us. And we certainly know those challenges. Tornadoes, snowstorms, etc. As to how we go about it, here's a process for your consideration. What follows is all about data. What should be counted and how do you count it? First, define the terms. Decide what livable really means. What is a complete community? What does this mean? Second, pick the most livable North American cities to compare with Ottawa. Examples might be Edmonton, Calgary, partners, challenges. Third, decide what parameters of livability you want to compare. There are lots of choices, but one should be governance structure, which best supports the development of strong neighborhoods and complete communities. Fourth, assess and quantify how each city is doing using a common baseline, say the 2017 data. There are lots of livability metrics online to pick and choose from. And we see this, one example being Toronto and how they have their data listed. And you see that with the neighborhoods. You have a very good baseline to draw on for good information. Fifth, create a dashboard in the open data portal to track results, make progress council priority, and engage us all in the working towards this improvement. And sixth, invite other cities, especially Canadian cities, to join in the race to the top. There's nothing like having a partner in this and taking some of those examples of other great progress. The official work plan. As for the Ottawa Next scenario building exercise, it's an interesting read, but as the authors acknowledge, it's not a prediction. The authors of Ottawa Next anticipate that unknowable and unpredictable transformative discontinuities await us. However, we can respond by building up Ottawa's adaptability and resilience, just as the authors of Ottawa Next suggest. How do we do that? I hope that the theme discussion papers will help us come up with answers to how best to achieve strong, vibrant, diverse neighborhoods. In conclusion, doing better is what we've always been trying to do all along, but it doesn't respond to two fundamental but unanswered questions. First, what do we really want for Ottawa in 25 years? What do we want it to be? I've suggested the vision statement about livability needs reference to strong neighborhoods and complete communities. Second, what do we need to do to make that happen? That's for the OP review to determine. But I suggest that using the current official plan as a baseline for the next risks seriously undershooting what is needed to guide us through the next 10 years and well beyond. So in conclusion, a number of things have been suggested, but bottom line is neighborhoods matter. And as one of the previous people had expressed, the FCA twinned and partnered with to have a forum in January 2018, and our whole caption in that was Ottawa is a city of neighborhoods. And if we take that as a model, I think this will help us tremendously in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, that was right at the beginning of your submission, and that was what I took away from it the most, Sheila. Councillor Dudas has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Perry, for coming and speaking to this, and thank you for all the work you do. Having been a past president of a community association for a decade, I fully understand the effort that it takes for volunteers to do this. I guess I'm just wondering, in the context of looking at this report and us looking at our evolving city, you're speaking to neighborhoods, and I'd really like to get a better understanding of your definition of what a neighborhood is. Because, you know, are you defining it based on community association boundaries? Are you talking about new growing communities? We are all looking at mobility as one aspect of connecting communities. I'd really like to get a better comprehension of what you define as a neighborhood in this very vast and diverse city.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for the question. Neighborhoods vary obviously across the city, and we see that really based on the population base. For example, Ottawa, just thinking of the ward system, that really gives you a confined or mapped area. If we look at the Ottawa Neighborhood Study, for example, which we're part of, there's very clear definitions there, and mapping that is critical for that, because people know where that captive area is, you amass the data, et cetera, from it. It's a fine balance, and one of those things is not to have this overwhelming, I would call maybe potentially NIMBYism. It's much more fluid in one way, and it's to have a balance. So if you look at the complete community scenario, There's some great models of what that all entails, and it's everything from things like you mentioned, mobility, it's that transportation, it's what are those facilities, what's the health of the community, so that you have a better balance in these communities, and that's going to be really, really important in this city as we go forward, so no community is left behind. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Judas. And you mentioned that you work with the Ottawa Neighbourhood Study Group. I just wanted to point out that in my experience, they don't get suburbs and their names right at all. For example, in 1951, my parents were one of the first ones to buy a home in St. Clair Gardens. It's still called St. Clair Gardens. Blackburn Hamlet's called Blackburn Hamlet. Bell's Corners is called Bell's Corners. Barrhaven, though, is a large Ontario city with over 90,000 people in it, and it's got neighborhoods that Ottawa Neighborhood Service doesn't have a clue about. Yeah. So I know that one of the things you want to do is put a lens on that, but I'd ask you not to do it in the suburban area, because it's very much defined by subdivisions. And there's some that from the 80s, for example, like I'm sure, well, we all know, like in Canada, you got Glencairn, that's way before the 80s. Centrepoint, definitely you have in Stittsville, the older area up on Ann Street and all that, which was very old kind of a subdivision. Councillor Blais, you have it, I have certainly the same kind of thing. And then you have like newer ones like Half Moon Bay, which is, it will be the Monets in Barrhaven, but it's Half Moon Bay. So, because one thing, and I hope that I'm asking you if you would agree, that when we start the ward boundaries, and you mentioned wards, which is why I'm bringing this up, that it would make more sense, or a lot of sense, to look at the communities as opposed to the ward boundaries being a street. And I think in the last go-round, it was the street that defined it, whether it was the geographic river, right? And what it did in some of our decisions was split communities. I certainly have that in Barrhaven, and people don't like it. So I think it's a great part of the conversation. I think take away to clerks that are here, or to Mr. Mark when we start the ward boundary review, and Mr. Willis. I think that that's something that your neighborhood ties into what we're talking about today, and certainly other pieces of what we'll do in this term. So thanks very much. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David McNichol, followed by Alex Cullen and Ted Phillips.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Harder. So I sent out an email last night at an atrocious hour, so I don't know if you've actually received them. There are several enclosures, but I think what I'll just do is just read the 3 paragraphs of my one-pager and be done. While it is obvious to me that the Earth is a complex system, in the legal fictions where I live, Ottawa, Ontario, and Canada, there are, for example, no functioning water, terrestrial, or air sheds. The public interest is not proven. Nevertheless, I do support this legally mandated review of Ottawa's land use plan, but to me, faint hope is not a strategy. In the past, I've appealed this land use plan 4 times to the Ontario Municipal Board. Please find enclosed a PDF of those appeals that just gives you a timeline. To this date, it continues to mystify me that we have no green space master plan and other master plans to balance the current hegemony of the transportation infrastructure master plans. Given the creation of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, along with many other jurisdictional changes, I sought help and counsel from the Local Planning Appeal Support Center, naturally looking towards a legal remedy. I'm not a lawyer, but I am now of the view that a solution might lie in the direction of human rights, given in the context of a functioning planet that might maintain life. That the Economic Development Department, City of Ottawa, would propose the document Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 as the basis for this comprehensive review of our land use is rather perplexing. However, given the complexity of this matter, I would simply refer interested parties to two closed documents. The first, an introduction to UNESCO's updated recommendation on science and scientific researchers, and the second is Ecosystem Services Toolkit, completing and using ecosystem service assessment to decision-making. An interdisciplinary toolbook for managers and analysts was produced by the federal task force of the federal, provincial, and territorial governments of Canada. So I wish you good luck in the review of your official plan. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure you're going to continue to be active in it. Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. McNichol. Next up is Alex Cohen, followed by Ted Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Owen. I'm the chair of the Federation of Citizens Associations Transportation Committee. As you all may know, the Transportation Master Plan, which I have a copy here, 115 pages plus another 15 pages of schedules, is a supporting document to the official plan. It is the blueprint for planning, developing, and operating the city's walking, cycling, transit, and road networks within the planning horizon. The current TMP dates from 2013 and is based on a number of supporting studies, including an origin destination study, trends in transportation modes, as well as public input at the time. We were looking at the report that came forward with respect to this official work plan, and we were disconcerted to find within it that on page 11, the following language. A partial update of the Transportation Master Plan will also be undertaken. Partial. This TMP Light will be a refresh of the 2013 TMP in order to update transit, road, cycling, and pedestrian projects, costing, affordability, prioritization. We will be based on the existing transit network, including Stage 1, 2 LRT, and the existing road, cycling, and pedestrian networks. The planning horizon 2031, travel patterns, model, and urban boundary will not be updated, and there will be no significant changes to policies, mode share targets, or list of planned projects. The completion of the new master plans will occur after the official plan is completed. So this means that there will not be a full TMP review as part of the official plan process. Yet this is a supporting document that outlines the networks, the infrastructure to support the OP goals and objectives. This means that there's no update on the travel pattern despite LRT. The reason that was given to us back in 2017 when we conducted a full review of the TMP and presented before Transportation Committee, and we're told at the time that an update would not happen in 2017 because we would wait for the LRT and an origin destination study would be required due to the impact of the LRT on travel patterns. The statement in the report says there will be no significant changes to policies, modal shifts, or list of planned projects, despite the development of a new OP. So we know the OP work plan will cover growth projections of 2046, expansion criteria, employment lands, new housing, neighborhood planning, urban design, mobility. Given these topics and the impact LRT will have in Ottawa, it's hard to imagine all this not having an impact on your current TMP. How can one construct the expansion of our city without considering the transportation linkages? How can it change the list of planned projects? As well, there are policy implications that need to be considered. How well did the 2013 TMP achieve its objectives? While there's been progress in meeting walking and cycling modal share targets, Ottawa has been regressing, not progressing, in terms of the modal share target, as transit ridership has fallen from 103.5 million rides in 2011 to 97 million rides in 2018. We hope for better, but we're far away from 2011 despite population and employment growth. Wouldn't a review here provide direction on how to better develop transit policies, service, pricing, etc., to enable the city to better meet its target? Won't the LRT change travel patterns and affect future road projects? The current road project list from the 2013 TMP should be reviewed for relevancy, given how old this list is and the impact of the LRT. The 2013 LRT covers LRT1, or TMP rather, covers LRT1, LRT2, but does not speak to the sequencing of extending LRT to Canada, Barrhaven, Riverside South, or possibly connecting to Gatineau. How can one develop an official plan for future growth without identifying these extensions? It's mobility. What about the implication of development charges in the new growth areas? How can one calculate these if the transportation component is out of date? What about traffic demand management policies, transit travel, such as parking, congestion charges, etc.? There are transportation demand management policies in place in other jurisdictions that should be examined here in Ottawa. What are the trends for vehicle use, given Uber, Lyft, Amazon, driverless cars, etc.? A review of changing technology should be part of any plan to look to 2036. So our ask here, as I come to the conclusion, that statement that there should be a TMP light and simply a refresh of the 2013 TMP with no looking at the policies, updating, what have you, is inadequate if you're doing a complete official plan. The two go hand in hand. So what we're suggesting is you should be doing a full TMP review as part of the official plan process.
Alex, and as I said in my email to you, you are right. Mr. Willis is going to respond to you.
Yeah.
Right, you haven't had that. You should save that, Alex, because we haven't always agreed, but we certainly did in that. Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, as long as it's in the minutes, I'm happy.
Do it. It's in the calendar. Madam Chair, Mr. Cullen is correct. That statement in the report, I apologize to committee, is a very outdated statement that was a concept at one point in time. We would do a two-stage update during this term of council to the transportation plan, an immediate short-term transportation light, and a more comprehensive review. That thinking is out of date, and the matter will come before Transportation Committee. There will be a work plan for a transportation master plan update to the Transportation Committee, and that information in the report, please disregard it. It is not correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
But thank you for raising it, and thank you for coming out today. Hang on a sec. I just want to have a look at where I am in motions here. Okay. Ted Phillips. Are you here, Ted? Oh, there you are. Here he comes. Nope.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome, Ted.
I usually like to speak to Planning Committee from the heart, but sometimes I get a little flustered, so I wrote down my thoughts, and hopefully I can get through them without sounding like I'm reading too much. First of all, I'd like to pass on my condolences to you, Councillor Harder. I know Mr. Schoenberg was a close personal friend of yours, and I think he would be interested in the discussion we're having today about beyond 2036, because he, like you, was a visionary and always looking to plan for the future. He's someone that our community will miss, so I just thought I would say that.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge that I wish Councillor Leeper was here, because even though I don't always agree with his views on things, nor some of the other speakers. I think that there's a lot of things contained in the staff report today that are exciting and opportunities for his input, and I look forward to him coming back to council to be able to share those views, because it's always a lively conversation we have. So I wish him all the best and a speedy return to the city. I'd like to start my presentation by thanking you, Chair Harder, the previous members of Planning and Council that passed Beyond 2036 in 2016. I've never been so excited as when I listened to Steve Willis at the opening remarks, as I was invited to participate as Mr. Johannes and others in the Founders Group, or whatever it was called, at that as part of the 2036 process. It was very exciting to hear him talk about, for the first time in this community, a city that would grow to 2 to 3 million people. That group was made up of CEOs of hospitals, universities, colleges, airports, business leaders, as well as many people from social service agencies and committees and community associations. I got the impression that we were all very excited at Mr. Willis's comments and an opportunity to start a new path looking to move the city of Ottawa forward and to build this city. There was so much excitement in the air. I relayed that excitement to many of you immediately following the first meeting. For far too long, I think we've heard from a few groups that we can never change the boundary, we can never look at expanding the boundary, but God forbid we look at intensification. And I think that through the staff report that's identified here, Mr. Willis is proposing to do both. And I look forward to the opportunity to engage with community associations and other people to talk about how we complete the existing communities and the work that's required to do that. I make no apologies that while I live in Ottawa, I want my children to have a place to be able to buy in Ottawa, one that they can afford. When I purchased my home 15 years ago, I paid about $220,000 for it. I would find it hard to buy that house today on one income, a situation that I suspect many of you are already in the same situation. A 1,400 square foot townhouse in suburbia now costs over $300,000. To raise a family, it's possible, but we don't have the same opportunity that many of you had years ago. The thought of having to pay $1 million for a condo downtown is also not very practical. So I think we have to look at an affordable means to grow this city and look for opportunities for our children to live in. We need to work with the existing communities, as was mentioned by Ms. Perry and others, to see how much intensification they will support, both urban and suburban, and we need to plan where we will go from here. The staff report speaks to this. We have engaged with staff for months now, development charge bylaw. They're calling it an interim development charge bylaw. One of the frustrations that we have is that we see infrastructure that needs to be planned, that we all want to plan, but we have no money for it. And so that is an issue that needs to be addressed by committee and council as well. A way to fund whatever it is that we need to build. And God forbid I support something that former Councillor Cullen said, but I also share some of his concerns about funding and building this city. Please don't put that in the record. I support the resolutions put forward for the city to be able to look beyond 20 years. This city has a very sophisticated planning track record. We have very capable people, and I encourage the city to be able to look at infrastructure and other issues to take this to 2 million people and beyond. Finally, in closing, I would like to thank staff for preparing this report and the staff report, which together, I believe, outlines many of the recommendations that are required. Discussion of ideas like food to table and affordable housing will be important parts of discussion as we bring forward the next official plan. Happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Anyone have any questions? No? You know what? Thank you very much.
Good.
The presentation we saw this morning, is that going to be available, is that going to be presented, if you will, on March the 4th?
Joe Barrage will be speaking on March the 4th, and he will be giving probably a similar presentation, not the exact same one, but
because I think it's important, because I'm going to tell you something. That's the speakers, but I can tell you that one thing that I find absent today, we have a lot of people here, but there's not a lot of excitement, and I'm grossly disappointed by that. Grossly disappointed by that. This is the most exciting thing happening in this city. Planning our future, my grandchildren's future, their grandchildren's future. Okay, I'm an older person now. I'm going to contribute to this, but it's their ideas that we want. I want my grandchildren thinking about what their Ottawa looks like. I want them talking about what we can do better. I want them talking about where they're going to go to school and what the opportunity they're going to have that will encourage them to stay in Ottawa. Okay? I want ideas about how we can benefit from the major resource we have, which is something we don't usually talk about, which is the city of Toronto. God knows on most days we don't like them, let alone love them, but they're key to the future success of this city. And I think, and I said this at council last week, we do not talk about economic development enough. And I think that we need to be leaders in this. I mean, we let Invest Ottawa certainly play a role, but not where we should. We stop being complacent. Why are you not excited? Sheila, you're probably the most excited. Ted, I mean, I know you're not really excited, but that was kind of enthusiastic for you. The bottom line is, I got a lot out here. Is anybody excited? Is anybody breathing? Okay? But really, I mean, do you intend to be part of the process? Because really, I mean, I feel like I'm at some kind of a wake. You know, I don't know what's going on. I don't know whether you're grasping how vitally important. This is going to be, this is the Grabeur report of right now. We keep talking about that from the 50s. This is Mr. Will mark on this city, leading us. He'll say it's not. He is the leader. He will be the new Grabeur, okay? You will be, okay? And 50 years from now, I hope people think, boy, that guy was smart, and he had really smart people working with him, because you do. And you know what? People that came to speak today, whether we agree with them or not, they care about this city. We have an opportunity to be a global leader. We are already doing that, and most of you don't have a clue about it. And we're doing it right here in Ottawa. People around the world know that we have a test bed that is unique in the freaking world, okay, on more than one level. We're going to tell you more about it in March. We've been kind of telling you about it for 2 years, but nobody's been paying attention. I want people to up. I want people to get engaged. And I told the staff this morning, I don't know what your plans are for connecting with people this way, but about 5 years ago, when we engaged the public in building a livable Ottawa, we were excited by the fact that 3,000 people contributed online. That's peanuts. In the 2014 election, those of us that were there know that this played narrow a thing, really. Now, it is everything. This is the tool to how we will get people engaged from the time they're a little kid, from the classes in school with the whiteboards, to the grandparents who are in the seniors' homes, to the people working in places, to the people in the public service, to the people that will say, why should I move to Ottawa? Why should I choose it? And like I said to the mayor after Joe's presentation this morning, we're going to have to not have a box that we're going to have to stand in. Our sandbox is going to have to be fluid. So please get excited about it, because if you're not going to, quite frankly, we might as well do a refresh, not a redo, and we need a redo. It's long overdue. I forget, Rick, who's missing now, said to me, this is my third total new one in his elected life. Now, he's been elected for over 30 years or something like that. So, but the bottom line is we've got to get this right, okay? Because we're going to go from being the 5th largest city in Canada to maybe the 10th largest city in Canada if we're not smart about it. And that takes options and choices away from you. So I had no intention of speaking, but as those of you that have known me for a while knows, when provoked or poked, I tend to absolutely be honest. So please get excited. I'm counting on the councillors, all the councillors we'll have this conversation with. Really lead in your communities. Get your people excited and motivated and contributing. We want big box thinking. And because you know what? No idea is a bad idea until it is. Mr. Willis, would you like to say anything?
First, Madam Chair, thank you for the compliments to me and my team. They do a vast amount of work, and I will absolutely resist being compared to Jacques Grébert, because Jacques Grébert and Mackenzie King wrote that plan in a boardroom without talking to anyone, and that is absolutely not our style. We want significant public engagement and participation in this process. This is not going to be written in a back room by two people. So I will resist that comparison. Secondly, I welcome the suggestions we had. Ms. Perry's suggestion about building this on neighborhoods she knows, I agree with her 100%. I absolutely believe we can change the words in this slide on the screen to talk about neighborhoods. I really believe in that, and so does the team, so we will do that. I am really looking forward to talking to people in Ottawa about this plan. The team is very anxious. We really do want to hear. We want to hear from people we don't usually hear from. We want to hear people in different formats, and we're going to be reaching out there, but we really do need council's help. We need your help reaching out to your communities, and that's where we're going to provide you engagement packages. So I'm excited.
Maybe we should have had this conversation earlier today. Thank you. So I have, we actually have councillors that have questions and et cetera. First is Councillor S. So just give me a show of hands. I know that I have Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Blais, Councillor Gower. I didn't even see you come in. Okay, so just hang on a second. Okay. Going. So Dudas, Kavanagh, Terry, Blais, who was right up? Gower, Menard. Is that it? Councillor McKenney? No? Anybody else? No? Okay. Oh. See, I knew if I asked long enough. All right, Councillor Dudas.
So I just want to say I'm incredibly excited. And if we can set the bar, because when people were filling out the survey for whether the city should opt in or out for cannabis retail, it was 23,000 people filled out that survey. So we should have more than that. Aim for far more than that. So anyway, sorry, getting back to my question. I have two questions quickly. I just wanted to know how you will be applying the information that was collected through the Beyond 2036 report, as well as the upcoming public consultations to the OP process.
We will be using a variety of mechanisms. Our comm staff are working very hard on a social media strategy for us, so that we will be using these things a lot. That will form the basis of a lot of what we will be doing this time around. We'll also be doing the standard sort of thing where we will be posting our discussion papers on our project webpage, and that there will be an online survey form, and that survey form allows people, well, the first questions are general. They ask people, what are the most important things in your neighborhood for you, and listing off all the things that are important to livability, and asking them to rank and say, how does your neighborhood doing? Do you have all of these things that you need? And we ask similar questions about the city for them. How is the city operating for you? What are the most important things to you? What do you see as issues that you think need improving on? And then in terms of the things that we've listed, we leave open-ended questions for them to fill in the blank if there's something that we've missed in terms of the answers offered, because we want to really, part of what we're doing with these first wave of discussion papers is asking people about these key challenges that we see that we're facing, but we want to hear from the public about things that we've perhaps missed. We want to hear about what their challenges are for them, and offering them the opportunity to tell us those things.
No, that's great. And I think that part of getting people excited is knowing that when we're asking them for their input and they come back with something exciting and they come back with something aspirational, and maybe envelope, and maybe taking a little bit of investment, hint, hint, that we're willing to look at that as a very viable option, because we don't want to be the town that fun forgot. One more quick question. I just wanted to know what will be the big differences between our current official plan and the new OP.
That's a excellent question, Councillor. You know, I think I was thinking of a couple points about this last night. You know, by the end of the planning period in this new plan, the 25 years out, we're probably going to be at that point, depending on market preference, depending on the type of housing people want to buy or rent, that we'll probably have at least the same amount of intensification as new build, if not slightly higher. So more and more emphasis on intensification, and that at the end of the 25 years is going to show up in areas not just in the core of the city, it's going to show up in the suburban communities as well, in and around the town centers that we have been trying to build, and those town centers will become much more meaningful. Chair Harder talks about downtown Barrhaven now. I would expect you to be talking about downtown Orleans, and I think downtown Canada is something people feel some identification with. That will become for real. I think to address these issues of mode shift and ridership changes, so we need to enable it in some of our land use policies. So as we talk about the complete mobility package, Mr. Collin made some really good points there about what things are changing. We have to anticipate that and build that in. We want a more sophisticated urban design strategy in this plan we have today. We have a very rudimentary one. We want a more sophisticated one. Our staff do a great job accomplishing a lot, but we think we can take it to a new level. We want to embed as a fundamental value public health in the plan, and that is so highly linked to environment and climate. Those things are all actually tied together, and resiliency of our community on health and climate perspective is a key part of this, and we see that. And finally, you know, we've always had an official plan that had an economic development strategy in it. They were always totally separate things. Now we actually want them to be actually one thing. So it's together. So if we got those 5 things accomplished, I'd think that's success for us.
Perfect. And Councillor Kavanagh has kindly said okay to Councillor El-Shantiri ahead of her because he has to leave to go to a Conservation Authority meeting. Councillor El-Shantiri?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both, Councillor Gower and Kavanagh, for letting me go. Mr. Willis, you mentioned earlier about injecting the villages or the rural villages, and so we can have our parents stay in those villages. And as you know, this new provincial government, we still call them the provincial government, talking about cutting the red tapes. The only way we can expand and make the rural villages livable and affordable is by changing some of the service requirements policy statement. Have you had this, and I know you did, but are you going to continue that discussion to be able to make those soon? Because we want to get excited as much as Jan Harder does, but we want it in a rural area.
I'll start with one of the first things I did when I got on this job was spend time with those of you in the areas to talk with rural communities, maybe one of the areas I didn't have as much experience with before I took the job, about what is their future and what do they think is at risk. And the reality is we have villages and hamlets that have lost their schools, lost their banks, lost other, and they're trying to find their place. And what we need to do is revitalize those communities and ensure that they're there, because they're an important part of our fabric. And the servicing issue you mentioned is not in Ottawa. When I talk to my counterparts across Ontario, if you go to the areas outside the Toronto area with villages and hamlets, problem, and we collectively among municipal governments and planning leads in different municipalities are saying to the province, it's time to update the regulations. One of the unintended consequences of your regulations is you're making it very hard for multifamily housing in villages that could contemplate a retirement home, and that jeopardizes the vitality of those, and it has to change. So absolutely, it's part of what we intend to do. It is not something that's totally within our control. We need to get the province's attention to this issue, and I can assure you I'm working with my counterparts in other municipalities to do that.
And if there's anything we can do on our part to help with this process, we would like to get involved. As you heard from Municipal Affairs, he's willing to review those recommendations you come up with, but nevertheless, we need to keep the pressure on him to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much.
I don't think you'll be surprised by my question. I've been asking the same question in regards to recent draft budget reports, and that's asking about the gender. What thought has been given to a gender lens on the official plan? This is something that's very, very important. And don't think of it as something isolated. This isn't something that's just about women. This is actually about economic development, because I believe we're missing a lot of potential, because if we don't put a gender lens, we won't see a very, very strong part of our workforce if we don't have facilities, if we don't plan for these things. Future, such as childcare, and quite frankly, we're going to have to think more about seniors' care as well. These are all tied in terms of the services that we make sure are available. I also want to mention that the climate change lens is also not mutually exclusive here as well. But I just wanted to bring that into light. I know when I moved to Ottawa many, many years ago, I found it very difficult as a young mother to integrate, to get to know the community. I want to know that if in the future, that as families come in here, that they can integrate really quickly, they can find services quickly, that this is a place that is welcoming, because we do need more immigrants, we do need more families, and we have to think in terms of what makes them very welcome, and the gender lens is crucial. So I'd like your comment. Thank you.
So, Councillor, thanks for that question, from you, Chair. The Councillor's question, I anticipated the Councillor's question because I was listening at the last Council meeting. I have asked some of my staff in our business services group to look at what other municipalities are doing in terms of gender lens applications to land use planning, so they're doing that work, which will assist our team. I see things such as if you, as our representative on this issue, are willing and hosting a workshop or a roundtable specifically on that issue, and this is no dispute. It is a key consideration, and we can easily implement it through the process as something that we are looking at.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Blais, followed by Councillor Gower.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I might not sound excited, but I'm very excited too. And without putting any pressure, Mr. Willis, I do think Councillor Harder is right that this has the potential, and we hope that it will turn out to be a very transformational plan that will guide the city for many decades to come. And as a result, is very important. The recommendation of the report has the end of 2021 for the work to be complete, which means the discussion amongst elected officials likely to happen in 2022. Something else happens in 2022 which politicizes everything. And so I'm wondering from your perspective what it would take to accelerate the timing so that politicization isn't as big a factor in something that is as important and long term as the kind of plan you're proposing.
And Madam Chair, the Councillor's concerns are not unique to just Councillor Blais. I think I've heard from a very large proportion of Council in the last little while the concern, because I think people understand that there's a linkage between the foundational plan, the transportation and infrastructure master plans, the development charges study, that if what I've been told by councillors is that one of the large issues raised in this last municipal election was, is infrastructure keeping up with everything else? And so in order to address that question, the motion, one of the motions before you that Councillor Vice Chair Tierney introduced does talk about breaking the process into two parts so that we do the key foundational elements that support those other studies earlier, get it done, and then we do some of our housekeeping work that we want to do in terms of making the document easier to read, easier to use, easier to access online, better quality. Some of the work that we can do, some work we know we need to do in terms of what we call modernizing policy can come as a second stage, but we get that foundational work done, and that staff feel the timeline crunch on this, but we also know that a lot of things are depending on it. So the motion that Vice Chair Tierney introduced, a valid compromise where we break the OP into two pieces. Now, I must say, one of the things you lose if we do adopt pieces is the ability to make that a 10-year adoption free from requirement for review. But a city as large as Ottawa that grows as fast as Ottawa, I can't imagine any council wishing two councils in a row would sit not want to review the status of the official plan. So that Section 26 provision of the Planning Act does exist, but I'm not sure we would ever be using it anyhow. So, but you do lose that if you adopt in two pieces. But I understand the concerns. You and others have raised it. We will adapt our process accordingly, and that's why we contemplate bringing by two-step schedule to you.
Thank you very much for that. So let's presume for a moment that Councillor Tierney introduces that motion and it's successful. By how much does that accelerate, or how much potential does that accelerate the completion of the work and the presentation of a plan? So could such a plan in that scenario, and potentially with the injection of additional funding, could that be contemplated by the end of 2020?
There are some real limiting in our ability to get done by the end of 2020, but we are confident the first quarter of 2021 we can get that first part one of the foundational growth management provisions. You know, we are dependent on the release of the next tranche of census data, which we will not have till later this year. Till November is the earliest date we'll see it, if Statistics Canada releases it on time. And then we need to hold a Section 26 meeting to adopt, to give proper notice under the Planning Act, to notify the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we need to do the evaluations, technical work behind the scenes. So we're prepared to do everything we can to get it to the one, and we understand the timelines. End of 2020, we don't believe we can do, but we can get it that first part, significant part, first quarter 2021.
And for the early 2021 scenario, what would it take to ensure that the TMP and MP are done in a time frame to allow for that plan to take place in 21, and a DC bylaw that coordinates everything together to be well thought out and expressed properly, et cetera?
So we'll be working on the population projections and try to land them as quickly as we can. It is dependent on the census release of data and other work that we need to do. That will feed the infrastructure and transportation master plans, and I think by getting them by quarter 1 of 2021, that will allow them the certainty, if council adopts our recommendations on growth management at that point, the certainty they need to do to make those decisions. There's other policy work in both of those plans. For example, in the infrastructure master plan, we need to do some updates to our approach on stormwater management because of climate change impacts. That work there's nothing stopping that work from starting this year. It's just some of the servicing extension issues that would have to happen. So certainly appreciate the concern. Work plans will be brought forward to Transportation Committee for the TMP, and we will bring a work plan for the Infrastructure Master Plan here for your review and discussion in detail.
Thank you for now, Madam Chair.
Councillor Keller.
All right, a quick comment and a quick question. It's an excellent report, and I've already sent it to some community members and encouraged them to read it. My encouragement to you would be to go beyond livable as our goal. Be bolder. I would like cities like Bordeaux and Austin and Manchester to look to us in 50 years as a leader, and I think livable is not for where we need to be as a city. So a suggestion. My question is around Gatineau. How do you plan to interface with Gatineau? It's clear throughout the report that it's an Ottawa-Gatineau region, that we need their cooperation, we need to work together. I'm curious perhaps where they are in their official plan processes or whatever their equivalent would be, and how do you plan to interface with their leaders to make sure we are working hand in hand to grow our community?
Madam Chair, it's an excellent question. We reaching out to our counterparts in Gatineau for the last year, and we've invited them to participate in a number of these sessions. They are very preoccupied right now with a number of mandated provincial planning exercises as a result of their major flooding incidents, and the Ville de Gatineau has both a local and a regional planning role. So they're good partners. They are very busy, but we are finding ways. Mr. Smith and I had a meeting very recently, for example, with the head of economic development for Ville de Gatineau. We've advanced a framework for some joint initiatives. We will do the same on environmental issues with the Ville de Gatineau. Mr. Manconi has regular conversations with his counterparts on the transportation file, so we are working on many different levels as well, and they're always welcome at the table for these stakeholder groups. We certainly the invites because they are a valuable partner to us.
Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. And next up is Councillor Menard, followed by Councillor Shirelli and Councillor McKenney.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the report. I am also excited about the prospect and what we can contribute towards this in the next little while. I just have a couple of comments. One is around the title that we've got up here. I think that could be more exciting. The most livable mid-sized city in North America doesn't scream exciting to me. I mean, I think, and if you're open to the change, take out that mid-sized city. The most livable city in North America seems like an aspirational goal we should be trying to achieve. I think get rid of that size piece. And there's nothing, I mean, I think livability, you could talk about a city that's not a gigantic city that would probably be more livable because it's not so huge. So I think if we can, just to take that back, it'd be nice to change that title. On the, from Pide's perspective on the urban boundary question of the OP, what place do we start from for that? Because that's going to be a major issue in the next OP, of course, is do we expand the urban boundary? By how much? So from our starting point right now, what is Pide's position on where the urban boundary sits?
So, Madam Chair, first of all, on the first point, we had a ferocious internal debate about whether mid-size was in that title or not. Mr. Miguelez would agree with you entirely. He's not here. Wish he was. He's taking some well-deserved break. But like many, there's agreement that we shouldn't be limiting ourselves. So I think there's an openness to deleting those two sentences, words. On the urban boundary review, I'm going to be really clear about this. I am not going to tell you today what we think because we don't have the data yet to know what we need. So I can't today tell you whether we will or will not have a need for an urban expansion. We may very well, we may not. One of the things that we will be doing is the population and employment projections over the planning horizon. It's a very regimented process that the province sets to us that sort of establishes our growth. We will then look at how much growth can be through intensification within the existing urban boundary and what those opportunities are. And we've seen lots of good examples lately of different types of intensification, whether low-scale, small, gentle intensification, redevelopment of mall sites, those sorts of things. And that growth that can't be accommodated, or if we have issues with housing choice and affordability and need more of different choices, that's another overlay onto this. There may be a need for an urban boundary expansion, but I can't tell you today whether that's here or not. We need the data to tell.
Okay, I do appreciate that answer. I just think when we expand the urban boundary, we're putting more pressure on our tax base, of course. There's more infrastructure to maintain, and of course the effect on the environment is a difficult one. And when we're talking about livability, one of the core concepts that emerges of livability is sustainability. That factor across all, whether it be within our budget, our financial sustainability, or with our actual environmental sustainability. So, I think to take that in perspective on the livability piece, boundary expansion, I think is important. Thank you so much for the presentation today. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thanks. Really good questions, and thanks for raising that point as well, because one of the things that in the presentation, as maybe people skip by, but I think I heard Ms. Perry talk about it as well, was about complete communities. And what does that really mean? Complete neighborhoods, what does that really mean? And would that have an influence on whether there's a change in rounding out an area that would also be smart for the city to be looking at investing in? I think that's one thing we haven't talked about today is smart. What does a smart city look like? And for yourself, they're always talking about transit and that and the type of transit and the cost of transit and that sort of thing. That could be part of your smart contribution. Many factors will come into play. We're at the beginning of this, right? So I think sustainable, absolutely, but there'll be other ways of, okay, if it doesn't require any more infrastructure to sustain that, is that smart? Is that complete a community? It's a big decision. We've got lots of time to do it. And I think that while staff are going to have their which they do have a work plan, I think that we'll will be almost the Crayola to the work plan, okay? And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you something very exciting that is one of my initiatives, and I hope that it's kind of like a challenge to all of you. I think we're going to Councillor Shirelli and then Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to be the kids trying to color inside the lines, right? That's.
I don't care if you stay inside the sandbox. You want to pull in some stuff from outside. It's a windy day. Okay, so what I want to say is, when we set goals that get achieved, people will quickly forget about the goals and they don't even get mentioned anymore. So when the Greber plan came in, one of the main goals of that plan was to prevent ribbon development in the capital region, right? When the Greber plan came in, one of the main goals of the plan was to prevent ribbon development in the city. So prevent areas of poor maintenance, low income, encircled by newer, more trendy neighborhoods, encircled by, so it would just continue like that. It succeeded so well that no one even mentions it anymore, right? So it actually, when we achieve successes in these plans, people tend to forget there was even a goal. And this is actually my third major refresh plan. Yeah. And I wasn't around for the Greber plan. Okay, good. So one of the things I hear from people, though, I heard as we were talking to people in some community meetings in our ward, was that they hope that as we aspire to be a more livable city, that we include in that the increasing costs that aspiration causes to basic services like snow clearing, like road quality maintenance, and that kind of thing. You can't, so one example I keep getting thrown at me is when you shrink the size of roads in neighborhoods, that means you must get in there, remove the snow and remove the snowbanks. You can't leave them like you can in other neighborhoods, or cars can't get through, there's impact on emergency services, and the costs go through the roof. So I'm wondering what emphasis they're going to have on cost containment on our basic core services while maintaining or increasing the quality of them.
Madam Chair, it is a very important question. And matter of fact, the motion that Vice Chair Kearney introduced, one of the criteria talks about implications on capital and operating costs, which is something, we've looked at capital costs before, we haven't looked at operating costs. It is a consideration. We have a constant process of continual improvement on what we call the infrastructure standards review. We did one already. We need to do yet another round of that in the next couple of years. We do keep looking at this. We have to kind of measure. In that example, when you set the road impact, there is a trade-off, right? On one side, if the road is narrower, we have we use less land per hectare to house people. Mm-hmm. We have less. When that road's narrow, when we have to repair it or replace it, it's cheaper to repair or replace. So there are costs on that side. There are also environmental costs, right, of having the larger surface, the urban heating. The land consumption side of that as well. On the other hand, if the it drives the snow clearance costs up considerably, there are these issues. Trouble with, we've been trying to bring housing and communities closer to the streets, but we're losing room for trees in certain areas. Mm-hmm. So we're working, these are tug of wars going on in policy that we are trying to work on. So we're committed to continuing the review. This will be something we have to always work on. There's no fun. This has to be continuous improvement. There is no one thing that ends that discussion.
And secondly, I think getting people interested in the consultation, it's not really reliable to say that just because this is very important, more people are going to be interested. We had the 20,000 plus interested in cannabis and taking part in that. But the second biggest public consultation in terms of volume of people writing into us since I've been here was for that rooftop cow in Orleans, where we got nearly 10,000 people writing in to save the thing. Apparently they weren't aware it wasn't a living being, but they saved this thing. And our last official plan got a tiny fraction of that. So I think it's important that we realize that it's not based on what we perceive to be important, but it's based on whether you're touching nerves with the public so that they actually are motivated. So what are you going to do on that?
I think, as Ms. Reddy said earlier, we are looking at different consultation techniques through this process. We've retained an outside firm to give us some advice on sort of new techniques that we might use. Online presence, digital is very important. We will reach out with you to your communities if there's interest to do this, because I do believe face-to-face has a lot of value. Some people feel more comfortable with this. So absolutely we need to do more time on this, where we will do our very best to reach as many people as we can.
Really good answers, really good question, and I think it ties in really well to what Councillor Menard was saying too, because when you were talking about livability, if you don't have much of a life, last night I was saying after 10 o'clock at night that on Twitter that I had some of my, because people were talking about, oh, my sidewalk hasn't been done for the second time, and oh, it has to be this and that, and I was saying, I have streets in my ward that have not been plowed once, okay? And there are, and these were in particular around the Minto Rec Center in Bay and Stonebridge. And why? Because of the density, because the roads are so narrow, okay? Because the land is so expensive, the lots are so small, there is no place to park more than the Honda Civic. Then we put a sidewalk on it, okay? No place to toss snow. So as far as cost of snow operations in this city of winter, okay, in the difference between community in Barrhaven built in the later 80s, around Mary Honeywell and St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, and Half Moon Bay of today, it's 9 times the cost to the city of Ottawa for that. So that's another factor we have to take into consideration, which is one of the driving forces of why, you know, we should almost have like maybe an update for people who weren't here during the 5 years we spent on building better, smarter suburbs, and what we learned from that, but what we still can do more, because they're having huge pressures, for sure. And you know what? I mean, if we try to make the city more livable, it's an enviable goal. The city more affordable, we can do more, right? So it's all of your questions are all tying together, which is where I'm going on this one. I'm going to go over to Councillor McKenney now, and then I'm going back to Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Great discussion this morning, and I'll tell you what would excite me, and I don't get excited very often about official plans, but if our plan included eliminating homelessness at some point in this stage. But I also think that, and I haven't about that, but I also think that when we're considering what type of city we want to be, I've always wondered why we don't aspire to be the healthiest city actually in the world. Healthy, just healthy, the healthiest. We walk the most, you know, we cycle the most, we could have, best recreation programs, the most trees, the best green space. We've got Gatineau Park. When we talk about the other side of the river, we've got a river running through our city. We could have food security. We could have dozens and dozens of community gardens for folks. We could have trees and all of the pollinators that, plants that we need for bees and butterflies. And, we could have the least amount of people smoking, the lowest smoking rate. I really do think we could be the healthiest city in the world if that's what we aspire to. And I would like to see that. If that's our goal, there's so much in that we could do. Some of it small, some of it big, that to a place where, because where this whole city is taken into account, because we are a large city and we do have struggles in terms of should my sidewalks get cleared before Harder's roads. I say yes, she says no, but we can at least have that conversation if we're talking about where do we want to end up, and maybe it's a bit of both, and maybe we do have to build more sidewalks, and we have to make sure that kids get to walk to school safely and start early, and in terms of moving about and staying healthy. But I'll come back to housing because that's also absolutely significant when we're talking about the healthiest city in the world, and or livable mid-sized city, either one. So housing, you know, we know that we're not going to solve our housing crisis by counting on private development. It's just not going to happen. They're a part of the whole complex puzzle of, you know, how we get to reducing and eliminating homelessness. But they are a part of it. And I just wonder if you could walk us through what the next steps are in terms of, you know, upzoning, inclusionary zoning. How do we ensure that the private development industry is doing its part through charges, through you know, providing the funding and the resources we need to reduce homelessness?
So, Madam Chair, first I'll start and say the Council will be encouraged that 2 of the first papers released in the official plan, one is on the healthy city and the second is on housing, both of which delve into the very issues the Councillor raised. I'll tell a quick story. One of the first people I met with when I took on this job was Dr. Levy, and he and I both talked about how public health and planning could work much more integrated way, and I'm so pleased that Dr. has taken that idea to a whole new level with us, and that her team is working in quite a collaborative way. She's been here. I believe she may still be behind me. She's our partner in doing this project, so we believe in that very strongly, and that is a legacy I would like this plan to leave for us, is on that. On the housing side, as the councillor rightly said, this is a complex puzzle. There is no one solution that solves it all, but bringing forward proposals to council. It's in our work plan, which will be discussed at a subsequent council meeting after provided council approves our budget today, to bring forward an inclusionary zoning study to bring forward recommendations to council. That will have to be included. We also have our Section 30 tools, which we are already enabled in our existing official plan. We can go further on that. So we will use the land use planning tools we can that are enabled by the province enables us to use, but it alone won't be the only answer. This has to go beyond anything this official plan can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Blake.
Thanks. And to quote Eli, I'm going to beat this dead horse more, I think, on the timing. What is the limitation to doing it by the end of 2020? It's as plain spoken as you can make it, Steve.
The timing of the census data, because what we think in the census data is that our historic trend may have changed a little bit. We may actually have had more increase in this last round than we would have projected. And if that's the case, it changes the projections from beyond that point, because it's, as the averaging looks at it, we have to contemplate a bigger population growth. That's very significant. That census data is really important. We have some legislative things we need to do to meet provincial requirements, and we need time to analyze the growth options to put them in front of council. So it has a lot to do with getting that projection work done and the staff resources we require to do this. Our team is very committed to moving forward, but we do need to go through those, get the data in so we can make evidence-based decisions.
Great. So staff resources. What kind of additional staff resources would be required to accelerate faster than what you've already articulated, keeping in mind the restrictions of the data and the other elements that are not staff resource-based?
So, Madam Chair, what we discussed in Councillor Tierney's motion helps us on this is that what I've committing to do is to report back by the end of March with an acceleration plan with the resources we need. One of the motions proposes a source of funding for those resources. We would come back with a plan, and I do need to sit with my team and actually construct that plan. And we will come back with an acceleration plan.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the motion that you think that he's making, because I think that might be something here as well. So let's just go back to what's on the table. The one that you're referring to, what are you saying that it includes? Yeah, but that's the whole one. It's not on the table.
So it's the motion called Consolidation 1 and 2 with Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report that in the Be It Resolved, it talks about creating one comprehensive document. Excuse me, I'm not correct on that.
Right.
Excuse me. It's the one entitled Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, moved by Councillor Tierney. It's the one that starts, whereas the official plan is a foundational document motion. At the very last portion of that, the second last Be It Resolved, actually the last two Be It Resolves, the first talks about breaking the official plan into 2 stages so we get the foundational elements done as quickly as possible, with other things that are not time sensitive pushed further back. And then the second, the very last Be It Resolved is that I bring back by the end of Q1 a revised timeline of resourcing plan for your approval. That will require financial resources to support it, and because right now, as you'll see with our budget, as it comes forward, our budget is based on our existing staffing resources. It does not have additional planning resources in it, other than we have consulting dollars available to us for the official plan, but we would need additional resources.
Okay, and so you would propose this in, you said March?
By the end of March. I mean, if we can get it done, yeah, we will come back to you with the updated timetable. We do need your permission to start. We do need that approval today if we wish to kick off as we intended, but we will bring an acceleration schedule back based on the 2-part strategy, and we will bring a resourcing strategy to you as well, because as the motions indicate, there's a proposal for a source of funding available to us.
And so that proposal would include the recommendations or options for source of funding?
Absolutely, that we'd be obliged to do.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Great, because whether it's from our delegations or whether it's from the councillors around the table or comments we've heard elsewhere, there's a number of variables involved here, certainly to do this very well because it matters that much. But certainly be cognizant of the fact that we are a 4-year term, and this is the largest piece of work that we will do with regard to the city and its future. So I don't want money to be an obstacle. So we're going to, I know that we've had some conversations about how that can be funded, and I think that we need to further the conversation. I know that Chair Blais, Chair of Transportation, is going to be having conversation about the Transportation Master Plan. It all fits together. It all should be working cohesively. How do we do that? And then I ask you, Mr. Willis, how can you assure us that your staff, especially if we find a way to fund extra staff expertise, how can you be assured that it'll be a matter of plugging in the information you get from census, et cetera, as opposed to, in the past, from time to time, we've been in situations, many times actually, where the process was, well, we need that piece and we can't go forward on that. So how can we have assurances that it'll be a plug-in as opposed to a, here's what we heard, this is what we promised to come back on, and this is what the census says, and plug that into it so you have that information.
Madam Chair, as indicated, Mr. Smith and I will go back to our teams. We will go construct a acceleration plan. We will give options for funding to do that acceleration plan to you. We hear you loud and clear that there's a time pressure that we get our foundational elements done so that we enable other projects to commence. We understand that. That's the objective, so that our work is done so that the other pieces can begin. We hear you loud and clear.
Whether it be the LRT to Barrhaven and Canada, okay? I mean, we can't just throw it out there as an example, but this is information that we need. I mean, we need the big picture, but for those people that are counting on, myself included, people using transit, the only way that we're going to see our numbers go significantly is if we give people the transit that deserves their support. Right now, that's not happening. And it's not happening for a number of reasons. I'm not laying it at the doorstep of Mr. Manconi, not at all, or his staff, okay? We have a very large city. We have a huge city, and it can't all be dealt with in one. So all I want to know is that we work really, really hard to work with all of our communities, our businesses, our everything, everybody that's engaged, and our neighbors. How do we move forward? And if you need more investment in it to do it, I don't want that to be the reason we can't. So you'll let us know that in March?
Absolutely, Chair.
Okay.
Just one further question.
Sure.
Are there any limitations to using any surpluses in DC accounts to fund this?
Mr. Mark can correct me if I'm wrong. The Government Charges Act does permit it to use for certain studies that relate to the ultimate deployment of capital infrastructure. So that if one might make an argument, we would probably need to be assured that that would not be appealed should we propose to do that.
So can we provide direction that that's part of your analysis, including the question on appealability for your recommendation in March?
Madam Chair, certainly can do that. We will investigate the legality of that, and if it is feasible and if there are no barriers to do it, we could include it in the bylaw being adopted this spring.
Right.
You repeat your last line, you make it up.
So, provided that there are no barriers to doing it in the legislation, it is a source that might be used on the argument that this foundational work supports the capital investment work we would be doing down the road. Provided there are no legal barriers, which we need to assess, we could include the draw in the DC bylaw we are adopting in May, provided that's viable.
Okay, good answer. Councillor Menard?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I looked ahead to the budget for this committee as well. And in that budget, it seems like we're allocated the next several years, $500,000 annually within the capital budget toward the development of the OP. So with the discussion that Councillor Blais has commenced here, how does that $500,000 I guess it's new in the capital budget, how does that jive with what we're discussing now at an accelerated time frame? Because I think that goes out to.
So the Deputy City Treasurer could assist me in this, but in the past, the practice has been that Council puts aside money to bring forward any official plan review through the capital budget in the different cycles as they come up. That's anticipated in the long-range financial planning elements. That's where we've traditionally done it. If I understand the question I'm being asked by committee today is, can we go beyond that in order to accelerate it and find sources other than that for this? And I think what the indication I'm getting is looking at non-tax sources, because our budget will be set today, provided, and ultimately if Council approves committee's decision today, we'll have to be looking at non-tax support.
Okay, but we are already allocating half a million every year for the OP. So this would be in addition to that. That's in the budget now. That's correct,
because the budget that is required to support the technical studies, it's also required to support a fair bit of legal support at the point of ultimate appeals. That's why that budget is set the way it is.
Great, good question. Okay. So, thank you everybody. Thank you everyone in the audience. So on the motion on Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, one, that Planning Committee recommend Council receive the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report, attached as document 1. The Planning Committee recommend that Council approve the work plan for a new City of Ottawa official plan, which is to be completed by the end of 2021. The Planning Committee recommend Council appoint a Councillor Sponsors Group comprising the chairs and vice chairs of Planning and the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committees to serve as the champions for the official plan review project as described in this report. And we have an amendment to that.
All the motions are introduced, but you need to vote on them.
Yeah, but the one to add the chair? Okay, that one is the one that ties into, which is the number for that, guys? Okay. The addition of the chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management to the official plan sponsor group. Okay? That's what that one is. Okay, so we have several amendments to go over. Can you just do the therefore be it resolved? Read the, Vice Chair, can you just read the intro, so the top part, 25-year planning horizon, and the therefore be it resolved of each of them? And for ease, we'll vote on each one, okay, rather than trying to remember them all. No, just the therefore.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just clarifying that. 25-year planning horizon, so therefore be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to use his powers under Section 4.5 of the Provincial Policy Statement to pre-authorize the City to plan on the basis of the 25-year planning horizon, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the Mayor on behalf of City Council to local members of provincial legislature to solicit support for Council's request for a longer planning horizon. Be it further resolved that the Planning Council direct the Planning Committee Chair to proactively seek meetings with Ottawa's political ministers and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in advance of Council's request to extend the planning horizon to the request by the City Council, and the Chair verbally to report to committee as steps were taken to achieve a longer planning horizon.
Before we vote on that, can I just ask Mr. Willis, yesterday I saw something that your staff did brilliant work on in gathering horizons that other large Ontario cities, large Canadian cities have. I think that would be really good for you to see that.
Yes, Chair, just very quickly, if you compare us to other major cities... Can
you speak up, please?
Yes, sorry. If you compare us to other major cities, Calgary has a 30-year planning horizon and a 60-year planning horizon for major infrastructure. Edmonton is not picking an end date. They're picking a planning horizon of reaching 2 million population. And remember, they're about the same size as we are today. Has a 25-year planning horizon. Vancouver has a 20-year planning horizon, and Toronto has a 30-year planning horizon. So it does seem odd that Ottawa is limited right now to 20 years. Provincial policy statement, and there is a mechanism in the PPS for the minister to approve a longer horizon, and that's the basis of the motion. We think we should be treated the same as other big cities.
And just to wrap it up in a nutshell, why exactly that's important to this city, that we get the extension?
Chair, Council this term is faced with some significant commitments to major infrastructure investments, particularly in light rail transit in ultimately phase 3. If you want to deploy and amortize costs through mechanisms like development charges, you need to have a planning horizon that allows you to do that. So if you, this would enable Council to make major infrastructure decisions, not to mention you can't decide to do major trunk infrastructure or transit infrastructure without thinking a long-term. Remember the comparison I gave with the Regions Plan, which was a longer planning horizon, by the way. That was a 30-year, right, John? Anyway, it was a longer planning horizon.
Okay, so on this motion, is it carried? Carried, thank you. Next one, Vice Chair Tierney? Yeah.
Great. This is just a replacement. It's a technical thing. Therefore, be resolved that document 1 be replaced with the revised version provided and distributed to the committee coordinator.
Carried. Okay, next. What's the title?
So the consolidation of milestone 1 and 2 with the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report. Therefore, be resolved that the study titled Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, document 1, be tabled and amended such that the results of milestone 1 and 2 be incorporated into this document so that all 3 elements beyond 2036, milestone 1 and milestone 2 together create one comprehensive document to be presented to committee and council for the schedule of November 2019.
Okay.
Therefore, be resolved, I'll just go to the title, Advancing the Review Process. Therefore, be resolved that the task of milestone 4, as outlined in the report, be realigned so the analysis of the urban land requirements to meet the projected 2046 housing and employment needs and the criteria by which the land was selected comprise of the core task 4. Be it further resolved that the report, which recommends the new land selection criteria, evaluate, provide commentary to the following: locations of financially sustainable over long term from both capital and operating perspective, location that results in complete communities, that the support of the city's investment in light rail, evaluate the locations in the existing built-up areas and the likelihood of achieving the required densities, the age and conditions of required infrastructure transit services mapping, which will produce a capital budget projection to support the housing and employment needs that will be implemented through the life of the plan. Be it further resolved that the revised Task 4 be presented to the Planning Committee and City Council for approval as recommended in June 2020. Be it further the Planning Committee recommend that Council allow General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development the authority to break the adoption of the new official plan into 2 stages, that the growth management matters be adopted in Q1 of 2021, and the policy modernization of the remainder of the plan be adopted with this term of Council. Be it further resolved, the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to provide revised for the official plan review and Planning Committee by the end of Q1 2019.
Carried. Thank you. Last one?
Last
Yes.
one. This is related to the addition of the chairs of the Standing Committees, Environmental Protection, Wastewater Management, and the Official Plan Sponsor Group. Therefore, be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council add the chairs of the Standing Committees for the Environmental Protection, Water, and Wastewater Management to the Council Sponsor Group for the Official Plan of Review.
Carried. Carried. Okay. Anything else? Any other? Does anyone, am I missing anything, Mr. Mark? Done everything?
I believe you've caught everything, Madam Chair.
I'll see, because I haven't approved it as amended yet, so. Mr. Willis, did you have something to say? No, you're good? All good? So on this item as amended? Carried. All right. Great. I wanted to, we're 22 minutes away from the witching hour when we normally, well, we never normally do anything, but when we have a plan to stop for lunch, but I'm going to suggest that we continue on with the budget. That's really our only substantive item left. I do have, I am asking that the coffee, et cetera, be refreshed. And there is a box of chocolate-covered cookies that I have had in my fridge since Christmas. I did not make them. They're decent, though, in case you're starving, okay? For anyone that's alive. I just want to say, Mr. Willis, before you leave, because that's what I wanted to say, truly fantastic work to you and your team. You have a very large team. We're just at the beginning of the process. And we're all excited now. Okay, so on to more exciting things. So 2019 Draft Operating and Capital Budget Planning Committee. We're going to have a brief are we having a brief presentation? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're good. Very brief presentation, and then we're going to go to our speakers. Just to give you an idea, no one leave the room if you're on the list. We have Catherine Boucher and Peter Trotcha, Aaron Andrews, Nahid Khan, Raymond Sullivan, Andrea Balfour, and Giselle Bouvier. All right.
Thank you, Chair. Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer, and today I'm joined by Shelley Van Buskirk, Director of Housing Services, and Stephen Willis, GM Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development. So I guess I'm doing this. Why isn't that one going down?
Can you figure that out?